So contemplation, mindfulness, and meditation. Oh, excuse me, before would everyone else mute themselves, please? Because for the next 15, 20 minutes, I'll just be talking for about 15 minutes. So if you would mute yourself, that'd be great. Contemplation, mindfulness, and meditation. You know, we're reading about them more and more. They're becoming very popular today. So the question that I often get is, are they the same? And if not, how do they differ? Well, I'm not exactly concerned with all those strict definitions. Things have gotten more connected nowadays, and the words are somewhat used interchangeably. And really, all three of those practices are important and offer us ways of getting in touch with our bodies, our thoughts, our emotions, and even that deep spaciousness within us where we encounter divine mystery. And yet they're distinct with practices which people might describe in different ways. So I'll give you my take on it. I want to start with meditation. I want to begin there because for the most part, we come out of the Western Christian tradition, and this is the most common. It often refers to a time of quiet after a prayer is read, or perhaps a poem or a section of a book, and you're asked to reflect on it and see how it speaks to you. What are you learning from it? It could also be a longer type of guided meditation, where there's various stopping points in which you are asked to visualize what's being said, and again, get in touch with how are you responding to that? What are your feelings? What are your insights about yourself and your relationship to God? It's often used with sacred scripture. I'm sure you've had the opportunity to have someone read the parable to you out of the New Testament, and then you're invited to take a role of someone in the story. So let's say it's the story of the prodigal son. You might even think about that story. You know, here he is, the one who leaves the family, leaves the homestead, and then is treated so poorly, decides to come back, and the older brother is quite jealous, and the father greets him with open arms. So you would choose to be one of those characters in the story. Are you the father? Are you the prodigal son? Are you the elder brother? And then what would you do? How would you feel? What would be going through your mind? How would you respond if you were the older brother and you found out that your younger brother is coming home and he's just wasted all the family fortune, and here you haven't even been able to give him anything, and he's been given a great feast? So you try to understand it, and you try to see your response. You see, what does the message have in it for you? How are you going to live your life? What does it say about that? So you deepen your understanding of Jesus's message for your own life. Because this type of meditation, you are invited to use your faculties. You want to use your reason. You want to think about the story. You want to think about what you would do. And your emotions sometimes. How are you feeling? What's happening in you when you hear that story, when you are that character? Do you want to help do that to assess the meaning of the passage for you and your life? And that's why it's called discursive meditation. The second one I want to look at is mindfulness. Now, this has become extremely popular. It even made the cover of Time magazine in 2014. And I'm going to divide mindfulness a little bit. This is the popular use of it that you often hear about, and people just quickly say, oh, I'm doing my mindfulness practice. It emphasized getting in touch with our body. You know, too often we feel like we're disembodied creatures. And it's very important to be aware of what's happening in your body, your physical environment all around you. And what mindfulness invites us to is to relax, to become present to the now. And so it uses breath. It uses a breathing in and breathing out to calm our nervous system and to reduce stress. Oftentimes people talk about having a mindfulness practice for about 5 minutes before they start a meeting. Sometimes in schools, even younger children, they'll sit for 5 minutes quietly. And what we're learning is however you do that, you really do start to reduce the stress in your life, your heart rate goes down, you have really, it's a benefit to our health. And oftentimes practitioners will say, do it for 1 minute, anytime during the day. When you're feeling a bit overwhelmed or whatever, stop, be still, breathe, just for a minute. So getting quiet and seeing and getting in touch with the now. You become aware of who you are and what you're doing. So there's many studies that show how effective that is for our physical health. Even our brain waves start to shift when we simply become present, let go, and be still. What it really teaches us is not to multitask. It's the importance of not doing 10 things at once. If you're breathing, you breathe. If you're drinking coffee, drink coffee. No multitasking. Now, that's sort of hard for some of us. I really was a great multitasker. And I really, if I was on this kind of a call with you all and I wasn't speaking, I might be, writing something down in my notes, possibly taking notes of what you're saying. But chances are might be writing down the agenda of the next meeting I'm going to and facilitate. Well, when I decided to stop doing that, it was almost like withdrawal. Insofar that I thought, how could I ever do everything I need to do if I slow down and just do one thing at a time? But honestly, when I did do that, and when I do that, I really find I can accomplish quite a bit, and even so much more than I imagined in that amount of time. And believe it or not, there is enough time for everything and then some. So if you are at all like me, I'd say try it, because it truly is a remarkable experience. But I know how hard it is. And just as a fun thing, I'm sure those of you with cell phones, I really do believe whoever developed that little ringtone every time a message is sent or a text comes in, or I know now we can choose, but that whole idea and that little bit of a ding ding, I think it has to be a grandchild of Pavlov, because it's that same addictive reaction that he talked about with his experiments, that every time you hear it, even though you know there may be nothing really important happening, that you have to answer that phone. So today, to try to even get those 1 minute of mindfulness is truly an important thing, and also very difficult. And I think this type of mindfulness is preparation for the deeper practice of mindfulness and contemplation. Western Christianity owes a debt of gratitude, I think, to Buddhism and Sufism, which have brought to our awareness the deep practice of mindfulness, which greatly resembles contemplation. Contemplation, although existing within Western Christianity since the beginning, got somewhat relegated to the cloisters of nuns and priests and brothers around the Middle Ages. There was a sense that contemplation meant withdrawing from the world. There was also a sense that contemplation was really passive. It was a God and me spirituality. It had nothing to do with transformation of the world. That was never the real reality of contemplation. But I think that's how, at least when I was growing up, if I learned anything, that's what I guess I learned. Because I never learned the contemplative tradition or were taught any contemplative practices in my younger years in grade school and high school. So we can thank John Main for bringing back this Eastern tradition into the Western Christianity. He was using the breath, but he also brought in this idea of using a mantra. So many of you might be familiar with Maranatha, or Jesus have mercy, or Lord have mercy. You say it, part of it on the in-breath, Lord have mercy, and part on the out-breath. So he took that practice of breathing and brought it back to our awareness. And then another person whom you probably might be familiar with is Thomas Keating. He developed centering prayer, which is actually a different but related form of contemplative practice coming from the 14th century cloud of unknowing. And both of those men's teachings really helped to popularize, in a sense, contemplation in the Western Christian tradition. So what I want to do is to first describe what they have in common, and then just focus a little bit about contemplation within the Christian tradition. So both traditions' practices, mindfulness and contemplation, teach us to be present to the now, just like the early stages of that popular mindfulness. It is to be in touch with one's body. That's why you use your breath. Even if you're doing centering prayer or a mantra, you always sort of start with your breath so you can just feel it coming in and through all your chakras. And you use your breath to quiet your mind and emotions. Both of them use a non-discursive form of prayer. And here's where for me, an important kind of distinction between discursive meditation and contemplation and mindfulness at this level. You don't engage your reason or emotions. You're not really thinking about anything. You don't want to interpret the text. There is no text to interpret. Rather, you try to come to a new awareness through sensing, or through what some will say the gut center of knowing. You know, that they say that there are three centers of knowing: our head, our heart, and our gut. In that sense, it's a complete sort of body knowing. It's hard to articulate sometimes because it's not rational, to which, of course, many of us are devoted our life to being very rational creatures. Both practices invite us to become aware of how we respond to persons and situations, to really know our shadow, a shadow some will call false self. Thomas Keating talks about the false centers of happiness. It's what causes us to cling to things, to be attached to things that do not bring us happiness, nor will bring us into an understanding of who we really are. So we befriend ourselves without judgment or shame. And both invite us to become in touch with our authentic and true self and to live from that place. Now, let me just focus for a minute on contemplation, because maybe we could say contemplation is Christianity's mindfulness practice. If Buddhism has mindfulness in its fullness, contemplation for the Christian seems to be that as well. And the difference is really our belief in a personal loving God and Christ. Because in contemplation, we talk about putting on the mind of Christ, or Christ consciousness. So contemplation then is the invitation to drop down deeply into this spaciousness where we encounter the divine mystery within you. It's where God and we dance together, the human and the divine. It is a prayer of silence, which calls us deeply within as we consent to the workings of the divine within us. You might have read that contemplation is a gift, and I think it is. But as Evelyn Underhill and a few others have said, really, we are all called to this contemplative place. And so I think it's a gift given to each of us. And so in a way, this consenting to the divine working within you is like receiving that gift, accepting it, and now inviting the divine to help you open it, to see what the invitation is, to come to some understanding of who you truly are. So over time, as we let go of what we think or concerned with, or whatever is stealing our attention, we are creating a space for God to transform us into a truer way of being. We encounter our true self, our authentic self. It is the kenosis of Jesus. So that marvelous song of Philippians, where Jesus surrenders himself. Surrender is not always a popular word today, but if we understand it correctly, it's just that letting go. It's that letting go into God's love. And it's letting go to become one's true self. So this letting go opens oneself up to a new way of seeing, to a transformed consciousness that can embrace the gospel values of equality, inclusivity, peace, mercy, acceptance of diversity, right relationships, and justice. It is a consciousness that enables us to live and engage the crises out of our time from love. It's as if, as you deepen this practice, as you enter that spaciousness, the magnetic center of love brings you right down, and there you are. So all of your responses, all of the way you are is motivated by love. So Christianity, although sometimes did teach a God and me spirituality, I certainly learned that growing up, I think always understood the gospel as moving outward into the world. Christianity values what happens in the world. It's important. We're part of that future, and it's rooted in the incarnation. So contemplation brings us closer to putting on the mind of Christ, to sharing in Christ consciousness, to becoming one's truer self. Contemplation and mindfulness invite us to take seriously our spiritual journey throughout our lives. Every adult should be part of that kind of a journey. And to do that is no easy task. Becoming aware is difficult, and that's why you need to take time and engage in practices that strengthen and expand your capacity for this transformative journey. So in conclusion, meditation and the simple practices of mindfulness might be considered the beginnings of our spiritual journey, inviting us and preparing us to enter that deepening spaciousness of encounter with divine mystery and our true self through contemplation and mindfulness in its fullest sense.